So excuse the very grainy image right now. I know you see a lot of grain all over here, but I wanted to talk about one of the light characteristics, light direction, and it seemed like it made sense for me to turn the lights off so I can demonstrate it better. So one of the light characteristics, light direction. And why is it important? Why we should pay attention to it? We can communicate a lot through light. In the grammar of photography, we deal with shapes and lines and rhythm, and of course we deal with light. And through light we can communicate quite a lot. The classic, most obvious example would be, just hold 1 second, this kind of light. I mean, you see something like this and it just feels a little bit weird, doesn't it? It kind of reminds you of, and I wish I had a flashlight, I'm just using my laptop right now, but it kind of reminds you of just holding on to your flashlight and making a very scary face. This is kind of unsettling, isn't it? A little bit uneasy. If you were to take a portrait of somebody, this probably would not be the light that you would use. It's just a little weird. That's not the light I would use if I wanted to take a portrait photograph of myself. If I wanted to create a flattering image of myself, that would probably not be it. And for that matter, I probably would not use this light direction either, which creates a huge highlight on my forehead. It creates shadows under my eye. It creates a huge highlight on my nose and creates, again, a lot of shadow right under my nose. If I were to create a nice looking, pleasing portrait of myself, again, this is probably not what I would go with. Now, this is not to say that these are wrong under any circumstance. There really is no right and wrong. You just have different approaches for different cases. So the flashlight under your face probably not so great for a portrait, but it's great for making a horror film, right? The same thing for light right above your head. If you want to create these shadows under your eyes for some kind of aesthetic purpose, maybe because you want to hide characters' eyes, your subject's eyes, then that's a great approach. But it is very important for you to really pay attention as you go through your life, your day-to-day life, to just start paying attention to what the sources of light are. And this will come in useful later on when you want to create a photograph. You will know what kind of effect you're going to get if you put the light over here or if you put the light over here. So right now, when you look at me right now, you can see that there is more light hitting the left side of my face. And that's because I have a window right here and there is still sun out. And that's why the sun through the window is hitting this side of my face. Now, why do you still see something over here then? If the sun is hitting from here, why doesn't this part of my face, why isn't it completely black? Why do we still see something here? Well, the reason we still see something here is because even though most of the light is hitting over here, even though most of the light that hits my face is hitting the left side of my face, there is a lot of light that comes through the window. It bounces off the walls, it bounces off the ceiling and the floor, and it hits me back. Of course, not nearly as much as the light hitting me directly from the sun, from the window, but there is some light that hits me like this. So it's important to understand that when the direction of light, it's a little bit more complex than just the source pointing at the subject. There usually is a little bit more going on than that, and usually we deal with reflections and so on. Now, let's take a look at how this applies to being outside. Because yes, here we have these obvious light sources like a lamp or a laptop or a flashlight, but how about being outside? So it is exactly noon right now, and I am outside, which is not a good thing for my head, so I'm going to try to make this quick. The sun is right above me, the sun is as high as it can be, it is hitting me exactly from above, so the top of my head of course is going to be the brightest. You see shadows under my eyes, you see a really bright nose, all of this because of the direction of light. So the light direction is going to play a huge role. Now, if I take a picture like this, there is really very little I can do in post-production. There is very little I can do to fix this. This is just not going to be a very flattering picture. So the direction of light plays a huge role. So the easiest way to figure out the light direction is to look at the shadows. So right now I am standing right next to this pole over here, and you can see the shadow, right? You can see the shadow pointing away from the light source. So of course the light source is right over there, and I can see it because the sun is hitting my eyes right now. So this is the easiest way to figure out the source, where the source of the light is. It's going to be away on the opposite of where the shadow is falling. And of course you could apply the same thing just by looking at people's face. If I stand over here, you can tell right away that, well, this side is illuminated, this side is the more shaded side. So of course the light source is going to be over here. And it's useful to pay attention to this when you look at photographs. Just kind of figure out where the light source is. But what happens when you don't see the shadows? And that happens sometimes. It happens sometimes when we have a cloudy day. And actually, let me show you an example of that right now. Alright, so literally 20 seconds after I recorded the previous thing, I'm looking at exactly the same area. No shadows. I don't see a shadow. And I don't see a shadow because the sun is hiding behind the clouds. So let's talk about the light direction when we have a cloudy day. And this is exactly what we have right now. Let me just focus on the sky behind me so you can see. We have a pretty cloudy day in Hawaii today. We don't have a sense of direction. It's not as clear when it's a cloudy day. And usually we kind of get a sense of the direction of light by observing the shadow. And right now when you look at my face, you don't see clearly defined shadows. If you look at things behind me, like you see a little post here, right? And usually you would see a shadow pointing in one of the directions. And just looking at the shadow, you know where the light source is, because it's opposite of the shadow. Right now you don't see it very, very clearly. So what is the direction of light right now? Well, what is happening is that the light is diffused by the clouds, and it also bounces off of the clouds. So right now the direction of the light is kind of from all over the place. The light bounces off the cloud, this cloud, this cloud, this cloud, all of the clouds all around. The light bounces off the buildings, the light bounces off the ground. It bounces off everything over here. And that's why the light is hitting from all sorts of different directions. That's why you see a much even light on my face. You kind of see it the same on this side and on this side. You don't see very aggressive highlights, you don't see very deep shadows. It's because you have the light kind of hitting from all over. You know, usually when we think about cloudy day, we think that this is not really the most beautiful day, it's a cloudy day, right? And we usually don't realize, unless you study photography and you study light, people usually don't realize that a cloudy day is actually the best day to take portrait photographs. I'm actually looking at my shadow right now. I know that when my shadow disappears, and my shadow disappears right now, I will have a pretty nice and even light. So notice that you don't see very harsh shadows, right? I am outside, but you don't see harsh shadows on me. I mean, usually if there were no clouds over there, you would see very deep shadows under my eyes, you would see very deep shadows over here. Okay, so let's take a look at some examples. We have Shaholi here, and first question, where is the light source? Let's talk about light direction here. Where is the light source? Well, if you look at the highlights of the image, and the highlights are the brightest areas of the image, you see a lot of highlights, really bright areas over here, right? This seems to be the brightest area of the image. And also you see a little bit here, really, really bright here, right here. And this is telling me that the sun, in this case, was directly behind her. And that's exactly what it is. When I was taking this picture of Shaholi, I very consciously decided to position her in a way where the sun would be directly behind her. And the reason why I wanted to position her this way is because I did not want to have deep shadows under her eyes. I did not want to have a deep shadows casting by her nose or again under her eyes. I did not want to see any of these deep shadows under her chin. I really, well, okay, this is starting to look a little funny. I did not intend for this to happen, so let me erase this. I did not want to see all of these deep shadows. I wanted to see as even of a look as possible on her face. And I knew that the best way for me to accomplish this would be to not have the sun hit her face directly. So I positioned her in a way where the sun was hitting the back of her head. And because the sun was hitting the back of her head, her face was pretty even. And her face looked darker than the back of her head, of course. But it's okay, because I can adjust my exposure on my camera. I will be talking more about exposure in the upcoming weeks, but I can adjust the exposure and I can have a nice even light without weird deep shadows on her face. Alright, let's move on to the next one. So here we have Jennifer, exactly the same situation. And once again, I wanted to have a very even light on her face. And I didn't mind that the light was hitting her directly on her shoulder. I thought that was actually kind of an interesting look. It added some interest to the photograph. I didn't mind the light hitting her directly into the back of her head. You see all the highlights over here. I'm kind of circling. I didn't mind this. I thought this was actually kind of interesting. But I did want to have a nice even light on her face. There is a little bit of reflection. You can see this is actually kind of interesting. Light reflecting off her shoulder and reflecting into her chin over here. But this is so small. This is such a subtle look that, again, I really did not mind this at all. Let's go ahead and move on to another one with Jennifer. Again, the same idea. I did not mind the light hitting her shoulder over here. I thought that was kind of interesting. But again, I positioned her consciously. I knew where the light was, where the light source was. I knew where the sun was. I did not want the sun to hit her directly into her face, in her face. So positioning her in a way where the light would actually be would be hitting the back of her head. Now, this is not to say that you should always avoid having the light hitting your subject's face. I mean, you can play with light. It's perfectly fine to play with light. What I found, I thought it would be interesting to have some shadows on her face, and I think it's different when you have like these obvious shadows being cast by your eyes, and I think it's different when you have some interesting texture created with the shadows. So I decided to play with that a little bit. I think this turned out alright. I have another look over here where it's also a little bit interesting. It's obvious she is surrounded by trees, by branches, she's surrounded by something, and I thought this was kind of an interesting look. You can definitely see a big difference though, right? I mean, having the even light of no shadows versus this. This is an interesting look. The other look, I think it's probably a little bit more flattering if you want to have a nice photograph. Again, I was doing the same thing with Jennifer, just kind of trying to create an interesting texture by positioning her where the light was going through the leaves and various leaves were casting shadows on her face. So I thought this was an interesting look. I decided to play with that. So there's definitely a lot of things you can do, creative things that you can do with light and shadow if you do pay attention to light direction. And this is the example I think I mentioned last week, where I decided to keep her face in the shade because I did want to have that even light on her face, but I didn't mind the light hitting her directly right here in this area, just to kind of accentuate this area. So again, this was done consciously, this was done on purpose, this was done with thought put into the direction of light and how I'm using the direction of light to convey the message I want to convey. Alright, so this was just a very brief introduction to one of the light characteristics, the light direction. Basically, it comes down to knowing where the source of light is and understanding how you can use that in your storytelling, in you communicating the message you want to communicate through photography.